Masechet Pessachim Lamitet Amoud Bet. At the very bottom of the page, today's daf is daf mem. Baruch Hashem, we made it to daf mem. It's a big accomplishment. Ashrechem. Amar Rav Yosef says Rav Yosef. The last three lines in the Gemara, the last 5 words in the page of Lamitet Amoud Bet. Would you like a Gemara? Somebody wants a Gemara. There's Gemara's over here.
160 minutes.
Go give them out, Nachman.
12 minutes.
לא לכלות אם שטחי חיטה בהדה הדדה. So we're speaking about things becoming chametz. And you got to be very careful that the wheat that you're going to use, the flour that you're going to use to make your matzah should not be chametz. Chametz by definition is something that fermented, that grew, that leavened. And what causes leavening when it comes to wheat? It's the water. When water comes in contact with the flour, with the wheat, that's the point where the leavening starts. When we make matzah, we're very careful in very controlled circumstances, surroundings, that we're very careful that once we put the water in the flour, we work it, we don't stop working it, because working the flour will make it, working the dough prevents it from becoming chametz. Only when you let go of it on its own and you leave it for a certain amount of time, 18 minutes, then it will become chametz. So we're very careful if you go to the matzah bakery in order to keep kneading it, and as soon as it's done, right in the oven. The whole process, I once went there, I think we timed it, Nachman, how much? 8, 9 minutes, 10 minutes maximum. The matzah is out in 7 minutes.
7 minutes, 7 seconds.
Nachman said 7 minutes. 7 minutes, 7 seconds. It's already out of the oven. It's a finished matzah. It's good to go check it out. Okay. However, here, what about when it comes to the kernel itself? Forget about the flour. Even when they grind the kernels, when they grind the grains, they do it in a very controlled setting also. No moisture, no water around there, and we're very shomer the flour that you use. But here we have another thing. It's what's called chaluta. Chaluta means to take the kernels of wheat and immerse them in scalding water. The reason why we do that is make it easier to remove a certain husk. There's a certain husk, I forgot what it's called right now, on the wheat. And if you would crush the kernel with that husk, it's not a good refined flour. To get a minchat solet means a very good refined flour, you gotta take off the husk, the husk. The poor people, they used to just crush it like that. It's an extra job. It's more expensive. So there was good rich man's bread and there was a poor man's bread. Sometimes what you want to do to make a good matzah is to remove the husk. One of the ways of removing the husk and making it easy, if I'm not mistaken, is to put it in scalding water. It makes it a little bit easier to get it off. Now here it says, if you want to scald it, now the scalding actually cooks the wheat. It's very interesting. And we said yesterday, once something is cooked, it can become chametz. If you have baked matzah, it's not going to become chametz. Why the Ashkenazim so careful not to put their matzah in water? Because they're scared some flour is not be cooked in the matzah. But it's a big chumrah. Once something is cooked, it will not become chametz. It cannot be. Now here, if you take the kernel of wheat and you put it in the scalding water, it cooks it. So you should be good to go after that. If you put it in regular water, lukewarm water, you're in trouble. But if you put it in scalding water, the scalding water cooks it and it can become chametz after. But here Rabbi Yosef is telling us, be careful. If you take a lot of kernels of wheat together, it's not a good idea to scald them. Because what's going to happen? Don't put them even two. Dilma azna chada v'yatba b'tzirya dechavreta. You know that the kernel of wheat has a little bit of lips. It's a little slit in the middle. Not to be confused with barley. Barley is completely smooth all around. It's like an egg, you know. But the kernel of wheat has a little slit in the middle, like the bleh. You know, you eat the wheat berries on Shabbat. If you look at the wheat berry, it's like a little bit like an indent in the middle. So what happens is you have one kernel that goes on top of another kernel, and it covers that indent. It covers it. So what happens is the whole outside is cooked. The inside has not been cooked. Now there's water eventually that's going to seep inside to that kernel, into the middle of the kernel. So 90% of the kernel has been cooked, but that inside piece has not been cooked, and it's going to become chametz over there. That's what it says. One will go and sit in the lip, in the mouth, in the slit of the chabreta. And the heat will not cook the kernel fully. Me'arba ruchota, on the 4 sides, ve'ati lidei chimutz, and it'll become chimutz afterwards. So that's what the Gemara is saying. Be careful, you should not scald your kernels and therefore you should not scold any, because you got to do one by one. Who in the world is going to do that? You should not do that. Amar Abaye. Abaye says something a little nu halacha. Lo lichuch inu shtre shibune behadeh adadeh. Now we're talking about scolding with fire. You're going to roast them a little bit. It seems to be that the stalks of wheat, let's say they're a little bit moist. They're wet, and it could happen a lot of times. In the field there was a lot of rain, and you have these, and you want to cook them a little bit, you want to roast them a little bit, you want to roast the kernels. And you're going to use that afterwards to turn it into flour, and then you make your matzah with it. He was saying something very interesting, which is, maybe you'll tell me if you've ever seen this, is what he's saying is that when you're going to start firing it up, a little bit of water is going to come out. Seems to be what Rashi said is something that's absorbed water. As soon as you start heating it, it spits out the water it has. So if you have two stalks of wheat which are flaming up, I guess a very minimal flame, but it's going to spit out the water from each one. And so if you have one on top of the other, the water from this one is going to spit out to the next one. Now you have water that came into the next stalk of wheat, and that's going to make it into chametz. Let's read that again. Amar Abaye, lo lichuch inu shtre shibule be'adadadeh, din manafke maya mehai ubala idach. The water is going to come out of one, and it's going to go into the second one. Ve'atel yidei chimutz, and it's going to become chametz. Amar le Rava challenges Abaye. Iachi afilu chadanami. Why would you say two, even one? That means that the wheat you're going to use for chametz, you should never sort of singe them or heat them up beforehand, and forget about two, because even one. Why? Dima nafik mihai reisha ubale adi reisha. You have two sides. Here's my stem, my kernel, whatever it is. So I'm heating it up over here. So water, I'm going to heat it up here. It's going to spit out water. It's going to come out in over here. Why do you need two? Two is going to be a problem. Even one's a problem. Basically, if you're telling me this is also, you should not heat up at all the wheat, the stalks of wheat that you're going to use for your chametz whatsoever. So he says it's not a problem. So So he says, I'll tell you why it's allowed. Because it's me perot, and me perot does not cause chametz. It's a sugya we saw 2 pages ago. When we said that liquid comes in contact with flour, makes it chametz, what liquid is that? Only water. When it comes, at least according to this opinion, when it comes to fruit juice, anything that's not water, oil, fruit juice, apple juice, 100%. 100%, yeah, 100% fruit juice or oil or honey, whatever it is, will not make chametz. That's what egg matzah is. Egg matzah, or those cakes that you buy, those orange cakes, those little. Every year, somebody calls me every year, I'm allowed to eat these little cookies from France over there. What's it called?
La bienfaisance.
La bienfaisance.
A French one.
Those ones are made with honey and made this, and there's no water over there, so that's called matzah shir. I can't become chametz. So Rava says, no, there's no problem over here. Because if there's a problem even with one. But I'm telling you there's no problem because it's me pirot, fruit juice, and fruit juice does not come chametz. Amar Abaye, ve'adar be'Abaye, and even Abaye who said that there's a problem actually changed his mind. Where we're going to see from another statement of Abaye. Ve'adar be'Abaye me'ahi. Abaye changed his mind. Dekol agav midlayayu lo mechamtze. Because actually he said, whenever water is being spit out and it's just flowing onto something else, it's not enough potency to cause it to be chametz. Chametz will only be when the item is soaking in the water or it rested inside. But let's say I spray water's coming down, and it's like being poured onto this kernel of wheat, and eventually it's going to go down. It's not going to stop up over there. That's not a problem. We're going to see that from the following situation. Damar Abaye, chai chad sva, Davishna, Sechifa Share, Zekifa Asu. So what we're talking about is a barrel. And the barrel is certain barrels that we would dry out kernels of wheat. The wheat sometimes is coming wet from the field. So you want to dry them out before you use them. Wet kernels aren't good to crush. So you dry them out. Where do you dry them out? You take a bucket and you dry them out in the bucket. Well, it depends how you're drying them out. If you dry them out in a bucket like this, it's a problem. If the bucket is overturned like this, it's not a problem. Why is the reason? Rashi explains, I'm going to read the Rashi quickly. Sechife shari, im piv kafui nemata, shamayim anitpalin min akeri al yedei achom, Ha'or zavin yotzin achutz share. So it seems to be they would heat up the barrel from the outside, and that causes certain heat in the wheat. The heat in the wheat is going to make the liquid, the minimum amount of liquid inside all the wheat berries, they're going to be spit out. But since it's overturned like this, so any liquid that will be coming out eventually will come out of the bucket and not be stopped up over there. So yes, liquid is coming from the top one and flowing over the bottom one and the lower one load. Yes, it's flowing over. But since it's not being stopped up over there, and it's eventually just going to continue to seep down and go out of the bucket, and it will not be resting and...
it doesn't have time to mechades,
exactly.
Right?
It won't become... It's not sitting in a pool of liquid. It's not being marinated. That's not a problem. But if it's like this... So now eventually the top water will set and become a little pool at the bottom. Then it's going to be sitting in the liquid, and see from here that it's going to be asur. So who said this? Abaye. So you see that Abaye changed his mind. Because what he said before at the beginning, when you're roasting the tish, the stock, the liquid comes out and just flows. If it's flowing down, it's not stopped up. He said at the beginning it's a problem. Here we see clearly that he changed his mind. So Abaye changed his mind. It could become chametz. But in the scenario that I'm telling you, it won't become chametz because it's just basically flowing over. It's not getting stopped up. That's what the Gemara says, and that was the opinion of Abaye. But if it's zakif asur, if it's like this, it's asur. Rava amar afilu zakif anam mishare me perot ninu ume pirot enan machmitzin. And that is the halacha, by the way. And Rava says it's not true. Even if it's stopped up, even if it's sitting in a pool of liquid from the wheat berries, it's me perot. Me perot by definition cannot cause chametz. Tanu Rabbanan, en notitin seurin bepesach. There's a new. This is not called scolding them. Notitin is also what they would do with the barley is they would soak it in a little bit of water to make it easier to crush afterwards. So it's not boiling them; it's soaking them. You cannot soak barley, which you can make barley matzah, by the way. Barley is a different type. It's not wheat; it's a different species. It's similar. And it's one of the 5 grains. You can make matzah from spelt, from rye, from oats, from barley. We usually make it from wheat. Some people make it from spelt. Some people even make it from oats. I heard that celiac is a little bit easier oats, right? Oats is celiac. Yeah. So people, they make it with oats if they have celiac problems. And even though they're not supposed to eat wheat, for the mitzvah d'oraita, they try to squeeze it out the smallest kazayit for Pesach. So, but if you have this barley, you cannot soak it in water. Vim nitet, and if you did it, now it's a little bit easier because there's no crack in the barley. It's completely circular and completely halak. It's smooth. The whole surface of the barley is completely smooth, not like the wheat kernel that has a little indent. So you should not soak them in water. And if you did, vim natat nikbeu asirot. So it depends. When they puff up? If they start to puff up, if you soak something in water, it's going to absorb the water. It's going to puff. If it puffs to the point where it cracked, you're in big trouble. That you can't eat it anymore because for sure it's on the way to becoming chametz. Lo nitbe'u mutarot. So Tanakama says if you put them in water, you shouldn't have done that. But if they didn't yet crack, if they didn't puff up to the point where they crack a little bit, you see little cracks on the side of the barley, then it's still allowed to be used for Pesach. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Shoran b'chometz tzomtan. Rabbi Yossi wants to say that if you say that they're puffing up, there's a way to fix it, is you soak it in vinegar. Vinegar has the ability to actually condense, to retract. It shrinks. Contract it. Amar Shmuel en l'chak Rabbi Yossi. Shmuel does not agree with Rabbi Yossi. Amar Rav Chizda, Amar Ukva, no nikbeu mamash, ele kol she'inu manichan al pi achavit, ve'nikbeot menen. So when we said if they cracked, it's not dafka cracked. It's that if we would put, and we don't know about these things because we buy everything ready in IGA, but I guess the barley, it starts to puff. And then, for whatever reason, the Gemara is saying over here, when you have, the Gemara speaks about this a few times in Shas, a way of checking things is that if you have wine has a little bit of odor and like reyach and zeya and like fumes that are coming up from the wine. If you're going to put these kernels on top of a barrel of wine, I guess obviously it's not going to fall in, and then they would crack, that's already called cracked. That's a way of seeing if something really started to ferment. That was like a way of checking it. They want to see, did it already puffen up to the point where it's already called fermenting? They would put it on top of wine. If the wine would make it crack, that means it was already gone from the get-go. If it doesn't crack with the wine, then it's fine. So when we said before that you should not soak them in water. If you soak them in water, what's the halakha? Depends. Did it crack or not? It says Shmuel, it's not that it cracked. All it means is if it would crack when it's absorbed the fumes of the wine. Avad Shmuel Amar Nikbeu Mamash. Who said that? That was Mar Ukva, I'm sorry. Mar Ukva says, and Shmuel says no, it really has to be cracked mamish. Avad Shmuel Uvda Bedura Debera Bachashu. And once there was a question that came to Shmuel in the city of Bar Ash Chashu, where actually they soaked the barley inside the liquid, and he wanted to know if it's kosher for Pesach or not. He checked it, and it says, was it cracked or wasn't cracked? He didn't do that whole thing with the wine, and he says, mamash, and he allowed it, so he allowed it that it was kosher so long as it wasn't cracked. Bottom line, barley should not be soaked in water. If it's soaked in water, depends. Did it crack or not? If it cracked, it's done. If it didn't crack, it's good. And there's another opinion of Rabbi Yossi, which is not the halakha, is that shrinking it could be done by vinegar. We don't use that. We don't take that. We don't follow that. Today we have everything in abundance and shefa. It's not at all like we have no idea how much everything is ready, available. You order something, comes to your house today. We're living in messianic times. But back then, sometimes that's all you had. You had to deal with what was ready. You really had to know all the halachot of b'diavad. Today, everything we have is always lechatchila. The nisayon today, back then it was nisayon as you get by, do with what you have. Rav Shach never had tefillin like this. Rav Shach, the Gadol Rado, had the little flimsy tefillin. You know those old flimsy tefillin that people used to have? Nobody has them anymore. They're called dakot. They're from today we have so many animals and we have such good presses that everybody has the strong tefillin. Nobody had that before. Today's, once you want to do the mitzvah, you're getting the mitzvahs the best. The gemars that we have, the shulim that we have, everything. You go to Uman on a flight, you get there, you say to Kari. People couldn't do it before. The question was before you have to do it. Today, once you want to today the nisayon is if you want to do. But once you want to do, you're served the highest level of the mitzvah. The Gemara continues. Amar Rabba, ban nefesh lo yitot. A ban nefesh is a tzaddik, a chassid, somebody who's careful. You have a guy that's very sensitive to spiritual things, and so he can do some. He's doing things that are above the letter of the law. So you should not soak your barley in water. Who is? Says Rabba, only a ban nefesh. The Gemara says, Ma'ir a ban nefesh. Why a ban nefesh? You understand? Meaning a guy who's chassid, a guy who's very careful, a guy who's very meticulous, he shouldn't do it. So the Gemara asks, why? Why are you saying only a ban nefesh? Afilu kule manami. Nobody should do it. De'atanya en notitin surin bepesach. We just said before, and we're showing a button now, you should not soak your barley in water before Pesach. Achi kama, ban nefesh afilu chitin, deshrire lo yitot. So, and so he says, what he meant is to say, no, a ban nefesh, even when it comes to wheat, you shouldn't do it. The shrire. What is shrire? Rashi says, they're harder. So it's interesting. This opinion says that wheat is harder and it's going to absorb less water, and they become chametz in a much slower amount. It takes much longer to become chametz. So barley shouldn't do because that comes chametz fast. But wheat becomes chametz in a much longer amount of time. So you could do it with wheat, but if you're a bal nefesh, you shouldn't do wheat. The Gemara doesn't like that. Amani Rav Nachman, man de tzayde de Abba, achid namadi pusha. Whoever is going to listen to Rabba, who's a big Rav, he's going to eat moldy bread. Meaning, deha beravuna lateta uberav avin latete. So basically, he's saying when it comes to wheat, you shouldn't soak them in water. Whoever does that, he's not eating good bread, because you know that Rav Huna and Rabba. So it's not like I said. He's saying that it's actually mutter. Even a bal nefesh is allowed to do that. Rav Huna did it. Rava did it. They would soak a little bit in water, and then they're going to get the little husk off, and they're going to do it. There's no problems. In 2 minutes, it's not going to become problems. We don't do that. Today, nobody does that. We have different ways of getting the husk off. Nobody ever is going to soak the things in water whatsoever. That's for sure not the halakha today. But you see that it's not such a big problem. The problem is not water. The problem is the chametz. The Gemara continues. We go more like this, buddy. Rabba said, forget about ban nefesh. You're just not allowed. So Rabba says, forget about ban nefesh. You're not allowed to put wheat in water. We have a problem with that. The Braita said you shouldn't put barley in water. Barley, no, and we infer from there that wheat would be allowed to. The Gemara says, Lo mi bayeh akama, lo mi bayeh chitin, kevan di itbe, Syria, aide bilmaya. No, sometimes we're going to teach you something. We don't even need to teach wheat. It's self-evident, like I said before. Wheat, there's another way of looking at it. It's true it's stronger, but it has the crack. The crack's going to get the water inside. That's dangerous. And barley is completely smooth on the outside. So barley smooth on the outside, you might think that it's mutter. It's not mutter. Let's just repeat that. Rabbah says you're not allowed to put wheat in water at all. The Gemara says, why? I have a bite that says you shouldn't put barley in water. So that means I infer wheat is mutter. What do? If I tell you don't put barley, then you infer wheat is mutter, or we don't look at it like that. This is how you read it. I don't even need to teach you wheat. Wheat has a crack. That's obvious that you don't have to do that. That's pashut. But barley, you might have thought that you're allowed because it's completely sealed on the outside in a very smooth way that there's no way for the water to get inside. You might think it's allowed. Even that I don't want you to do. The Gemara continues. V'Rava Hadar Amar Rava Mutar Litot. So Rava just said now, don't soak the wheat in water. Rava changed his mind. And Rava then said, you're allowed to soak wheat in water. Detanya, Yotzin bepat nikiya behadra. So far, everybody's with me? Chaim, you're good? So, what do we say now? Rava on one hand said, don't soak your wheat in water. Now he's changing your mind that you can't soak your wheat in water. Where does Rava get that from? Because we have a Braita. The Braita says, Yotzin bepat nikiya. When it comes to Pesach, you have two types of bread, like we spoke about it being. You have a clean bread, a very fine, refined flour. Vehadra. Hadra is a poor man's bread. We took away the hadar. Hadar means beauty of it, and it's hadra. Hadar, we took away. It's meaning a cheap bread that you didn't crush fine. You didn't remove all the the cheap pieces, all the extra pieces, and you basically made flour out of the whole thing. It's not the best. Now, you're yoitze with both. Ve'ivshar nikiya v'lo litita. Now, Rab is telling you, you can't have a very fine flour without litita. The way of removing the husk, at least back then, was to soak it in water to get the husk off. So if you tell me on Pesach, I can do my mitzvah with two types. A is a very fine flour. B is a coarse flour. Well, the fine flour can only be through soaking in water. So if you tell me I can do the mitzvah with a fine flour, it must mean that I soaked it. Below litita, you cannot get it to the point of being a fine flour without soaking it. The Gemara challenges that. Ite verapa pererava. Hakemachim v'saltot shenochim shel kfarim teorim. You know, there was another halacha which we spoke about a few times. It's something to mikamel tuma. We actually spoke about it today in the halacha in the shul about the schach. Something to receive tuma needs to touch something that's tameh. A dead corpse, a dead animal, a zav, a nida, mitzora. All those people are tameh and they give over tuma. Don't forget that there is a halacha that's from a pasuk that something only receives tuma if there's a conduit to pass the tuma from A to B. The conduit is liquid, and not only if it had liquid now, if it ever had liquid on it. If that's what I think it is. If it had liquid on it, since it had liquid, so now it's able to receive the tuma from A to B. So we have halacha. Let's say you have flour, and you go to a goyish place, and the guy's not careful for tuma or not, and you buy this flour from a goy, nochi, and it is in the kfarim. You buy from the villages. What is the halacha? Teorin, v'shel krachim temeim, and in the krach it is tameh. The kfarim my tama la mishum de natite v'kakarele solid. Look at the svara. You got to hold a little bit ABC. We're saying that if you buy flour from a goy in a village, can this become tuma or not? Well, it depends. Did ever water get on it or water didn't get in? Well, you can buy two types of flour from a goy. You can buy solet and you can buy kemach, which is a regular flour. Could be all types of flour. And you can buy solid. And guess what? If you bought it from a goy in a village, it's not to become tameh. You know why? Because they're not careful. They don't do things so well. It's not. an artisan bread. It's a villager bread. So the villager, when he's going to make the flour, he's not going to soak it in water. And we still call it solid. So we're saying it's not mikabel tuma, because water didn't get on it. And you say that there's two types. A is flour, and B is solid. Solid, by definition, is fine flour. So you can have fine flour that had no water on it, and it's still called fine flour. So you see that what Rabbi said, it's a proof that you're allowed to soak your things in water. It's not a good proof. Because you're saying, what did Rabbi say? You're allowed to do mitzvah with fine flour. And fine flour must necessarily be soaked in water. Right, true. I have a baita that says if you buy flour from a goy in the village, it's called solid and it's not soaked in water. And if you buy it from the one in the city, well, he's going to do things properly, so he's going to soak in water. So what will Rava answers that? Tirgima akimcha. So Rava sort of got away around it, says, no. When it's said that it's not Mikal Tuma, there's two things in that Mishnah. In that Mishnah, that Braita we just taught, one is the fine flour and one is the regular flour. The regular flour is not going to get Tuma, but the fine flour is going to get Tuma. So basically, he just said that you misread the Mishnah. Even when you buy from the goy from the village, for sure that there was water on it, there's no way around it. But who said, so Rava, refuted Rav Papa. But Tal de Nafak, when Rava left the Beit Midrash, so Rav Papa didn't know what to say. He said, okay. When Rava left, he remembered something else. He said, Ay, Chaban, my tam lo miha. And he said, you know what, I just remembered another proof that I'm right. Amar Rav Zeira, Amar Rav Yirmiyah, Amar Shmuel, Chitin shel menachot. Menachot is a korban that we bring in the Beit HaMikdash. Some of the korbanot were actually made of flour. Yeah. You bring bread.
And the afternoon, no?
Yeah, the korban mincha, menachot, en notitin otam, v'kakarele solet. Almost finished, Tadik. So we see that the korban mincha was not put in water because we want them to be we don't want them to be chametz, and we still call them solid. From here we see a proof, which is what we do today, that you can actually get the husk off without putting it in water. So therefore, Rabba doesn't seem to be right. Just review that very quickly. Rabba says, I'll prove to you allowed to put your wheat in water. Why? Because you can do your mitzvah with fine flour of matzah, and you have to put it in water before you get fine flour. The Gemara says, Rapapa, wrong. The mincha in the Beit HaMikdash was made from fine flour. It's called soret, and we know the halakha, you can't put it in water. And still, Hadar Amar Rava mitzvat ditot. Rava didn't change his mind. Rava still continued. He says, you have a mitzvah to, not only that you're not allowed, not only you're allowed to, you have to. You got to do it to get a good one. Why? Shnema ushmartem et mitzvot. Rava is going to prove that you have to put it in water. This is very interesting halakha. Why? Because there's halakha, and you're going to learn something important from this aside in halakha. When you're going to go buy a matzah, you're going to need to remember this. Ushmartem et matzot. You have a mitzvah of matzah shmura. You know that, right? If you buy something is regular matzah, it's for sure not chametz. You can't do the mitzvah with it. The matzah needs to be watched and guarded, the shem mitzvah. So if you go to the matzah bakery, and this is the halakha, as soon as they put the water together with the flour, that's when it could eventually become chametz. Now you need to say the Shem Matzah Mitzvah. They have a sign over there. There's the Mashiach coming around. The Shem Matzah Mitzvah. The Shem Matzah Mitzvah. They're always doing it. The Shem Matzah Mitzvah. Really, al pi halakha, it's enough to do it once a day. In the morning, you say the Shem Matzah. It counts for the whole day. But they make him do it all the time. Every 10 minutes, they tell him Shem Matzah. So they're doing it the sake of the Matzah. Now, so that's one thing. So says Rava, you gotta have Matzah Shmura. Says over here, Vil Ushmartem et HaMatzot. So you see that it must be that you can put the kernel in water. Because if you don't need to put the kernel in water, so then what do you need shmura? He's saying matzah shmura, as soon as you put the kernel in water, that's when you got to get careful that it doesn't become chametz. Ishimur delisha, shimur delisha na shimuku. Because if you want to say that you only got to start watching and doing it for the same mitzvah, when you start to knead the bread together, that's when you put the flour and the water together. That's called when you get a dough. That's not called shmura. You know how we know? Let's say you take a flour from a dough from a goy, and you know it's not chametz. You for sure not chametz. Adam mimarek chesomehen ubidvad shochan kazait matzah b'achona. When it comes, you can eat them. They're not chametz, but you gotta eat another kazait at the end of your seder. B'achona in berishona lo. and you got to eat another kazait. Ma'itama mishum delo avar be'ushimu. So you got to eat another matzah, meaning to do your mitzvah matzah on that night. The whole week you can eat any matzah you want, but for the night of the seder you got to eat matzah shmura. So you're gonna eat at least it's not chametz. Ma'itama mishum delo avar be'shimu. You see, what's the problem with the goyish one? The goyish one didn't have shmira, so you can't be yotzeh. So you see from here that the kneading is not shmura. The Gemara does v'lavi shimur me'afia. 1 second. So maybe I'll do the shmura when I put it in the oven. Ve'elach elalav shma mina shimur mikara ba'inan. So you see from here that you need shmura even before the baking. You need it even before the kneading. The Gemara says that doesn't make sense. Umemai din mashaniatam de beidna denachid neshimur no avid neshimur avarechet de beidna denachid neshimur avid neshimur. Why? The goyish one was already kneaded. But if I would watch it at the time of the kneading, that's called mashmura. Achenami neshimur delisha beshimur. So we just repeat now what we just said. Rava said, I'll prove to you that you have a mitzvah to put it in the water. You know why? Because you need shmura. And Rava says shmura is not baking and not kneading. You know what's his proof? If you take a goyish dough and you put it in the oven, you didn't do your mitzvah. Why not? You do the shmira when you put it in the oven. I'm making sure it's not going to be too much time in the oven. It's not going to be 20 minutes in the oven. So you see, I did no, that's not called shmura. The Gemara says, yeah, but maybe shmura is at the time of kneading. So Rava says, since it's not then, it must be from the get-go when you put it in the water. And the Gemara says, no, not true. Maybe it's the time of kneading, that's when you need the shmura. And even though we had a good proof against Rava, he didn't change his mind. ואפילו אחי לא הדר ברבה, דאמר להנו מהפכי כיפה, כי מהפריטור הפיכו לשם מצווה. So Rava even told the people that were making piles of wheat, when you're making the piles of wheat in the field, you're cutting them, making piles, do it l'shem matzah. I want you to do it from the get-go, and even rain could come on it when you're cutting them. And the Gemara says, Alma kasavar shimur mikara mitchilato v'ad sofo. From the time you start using that wheat, that's you need shimura. And the Gemara says, Mar bered Ravina, says over here, Man katane ime be'arbe. And his mother would gather for him wheat for the purpose of Pesach. She would do it even when she put them in the bowls, even the time we're cutting them. So from here we see a big machloket. Do we need matzah shmura? You see here very clearly that it seems to be the halakha is when you start to need it. And that's the halakha. When could it become? You need shmura when it could become chametz. When could it become chametz? When you put water. If I have a stock of wheat, that's not chametz. When you put water, you have the flour, you put the water together, that's when it gets. So that's when you need a Jew and you need to do the Shem Matzah Mitzvah. But anything before that, you don't need to. But still, Rabbi was machmir to do the shmura from the time of cutting it. And that's what the Gemara says. That's why when you're going to buy your matzah, it's going to say in the box, shmura mizman kitzira. From the time you cut it, that's already shmura, even from that time. Chazak ul